Ohio State's defensive recruiting continues to be high. The Buckeyes picked up a latest. Ohio State's defensive back recruiting in 2025 continues to have big momentum, landing Na'eem Offord, the number 5 player, top cornerback in the country out of Alabama. You pair that with Devin Sanchez, the number 2 cornerback in the country. You've got the top 2 cornerbacks in the country committed to Ohio State the first time since 2017. Anybody, anywhere has done that. Ohio State's done that as their 8th commitment in their 2025 recruiting class, number 4 class in the country. I'm Stephen Means. That's Andrew Gillis. Andrew, how big of a deal is it that Ohio State just picked up this 5-star kid from Alabama, and the timing of it, given the recent news coming out of that state?
Well, I mean, so it came out of nowhere, right? Like it was a surprise. It kind of happened where it was one of those things that there wasn't an announcement scheduled. There wasn't a big grandiose and, there wasn't this big thing that, Carter Lowe had last week where it was, hey, 247 is there and Rivals is there. It wasn't that. It just kind of happened. So it was a great surprise for Ohio State fans because we have talked about this defensive back recruiting and cornerback recruiting specifically where we're like, whoa, this is crazy. This is, look at how good this is. Here's some context for this. Ohio State in the 2024 recruiting class, they signed the number 1 and number 7 players at receiver. That was Jeremiah Smith. That was Mylan Graham. And everybody talks about Ohio State receiving as, oh my goodness. And they had, up until signing day, the number 14 player signed committed, I should say, in Jeremiah McClellan. So that's 1, that's 7, that's 14. Ohio State currently has 1, 2, and 10 committed at cornerback. So if you're looking at the positional rankings for how Ohio State's doing in terms of bringing in players, cornerback recruiting, it is not a stretch to say. Now, we're obviously not going to not comparing them as players, just in terms of rankings. Cornerback recruiting is better at Ohio State right now than receiver recruiting is. That is where we are at. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So you look at where this cornerback room is, you've got a remarkably talented room where you got Offord, you've got Devin Sanchez, obviously. Blake Woodby, the kid out of Baltimore, he's a top 70, I think he's 76th overall, so he's a top 80 recruit. That's nothing to sneer at either. That kid's a really good football player as well. So you get all 3 of those guys in, and then you pair it with the fact that you signed Jermaine Matthews, top 100 recruit, Calvin Simpson Hunt, top 100 recruit, Aaron Scott, 5-star recruit, Bryce West, top 100 recruit, and Miles Lockhart, who's a 4-star recruit in the previous 2 cycles. That's ridiculous. This is getting comical with how good Ohio State cornerback recruiting is right now. So for what this means, and I know, you've done this a lot too, so you can talk about maybe pulling kids out of the South and kind of how rare this is and what that means. But in terms of an on-field product, it is not a stretch to say that Tim Walton is recruiting at a better clip than Brian Hartline is. And that's not a knock against Brian Hartline. This just is ridiculous for what Ohio State's cornerback recruiting is right now. So where they're at, both talent-wise, both, what they're doing in terms of going to get kids, Offord's from Birmingham, Alabama, Sanchez is from Houston, Texas, Woodby's from Baltimore, Maryland. They are going all over the country, and they are nabbing these elite players, and you're doing it at a premier position, right? At a position that really matters. And when you're going into a new Big Ten where you got USC coming in, you got Oregon coming in, you got Washington coming in, you got UCLA coming in, you got teams that like to throw the ball around a little bit. Penn State just had a new offensive coordinator. They might throw the ball around a little bit. Michigan will always beat Michigan. But there are teams that are going to throw this rock around, and now you are countering with, hey, we're going to have the best corners in the country. From an on-field perspective, it's silly how good this is.
Tim Walton clearly in a groove right now. Getting Caleb Downs out of the transfer portal, that was a big deal. Obviously, coming off of the class, he had the last 2 cycles, but we've talked about this on our Buckeye Talk pod. Of the 4 guys he had gotten in the previous 2 cycles, 3 of those guys were in your backyard, and Jermaine Matthews and Aaron Scott and Bryce West. So it's almost like, yeah, we talk about that with offensive line. You got to talk about it the same way with cornerback. It's almost a conversation if you don't get those guys, especially if you're losing them to guys like Michigan and whatnot. Calvin Simpson, big deal out of Texas. You flip that kid who Texas Tech thought they had found a hidden gem, and you end up flipping that kid, and you're excited about his future. But in this class, Tim Walton is flexing his muscles a little bit. Naheem Offord coming off a 2-day visit over the weekend. So while it's out of the blue for him to make a decision that quickly, it's more proof in the pudding of just of the job that Tim Walton is doing right now. I texted this out to our texter 614-350-3315. A couple of years ago, I wrote a story about Aaron Scott, who not Aaron Scott, excuse me, AJ Harris, who was a 5-star cornerback in the 2022 class, originally committed to Georgia, has since, I think, transferred to Penn State, if I'm remembering that correctly. But it was a big deal when they offered AJ Harris, because they don't offer kids from Alabama. It's just not really, they don't have ends there, right? And you had Nick Saban there. So you're thinking that between Auburn and Alabama and some of those other SEC schools, they had not offered people. I think AJ Harris at the time was like the 17th player since like 1981 that they had offered out of Alabama. In fact, the last time they landed a kid out of Alabama was in 1981. And Tim Walton comes in here. His first cycle through here, he does a great job recruiting, but the on-field product maybe not as good. But a lot of that was maybe injury related with Cameron Brown and Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock. And then year 2, we saw obviously that room take a big jump. And now we're seeing, you're really excited about the future. You brought up the Brian Hartline aspect of this. This is what the defense was missing. They were missing a guy who just in every cycle, he's going to go out there and get dudes. And that's where Tim Walton has gotten to this point. Like I said, Devin Sanchez and Na'eem Offord, the top two corners in the class as of right now. If those two guys make it to signing day and they hold on to those rankings, the only other time a team has signed the top 2 cornerbacks in the country in the same recruiting class, it was Ohio State in 2017 with Sean Wade and Jeff Okudah, and they turned out to be pretty good players for Ohio State. So this is the level Ohio State's recruiting at defensively, especially in the defensive backfield. As to your point, Andrew, we're usually talking about the offensive recruiting at this point, this early in the cycle, but we're talking about the defensive back recruiting right now because they have become the backbone of the class with 3 commits.
So you mentioned it right there. I mean, that was exactly my point. You look at this class, and one of the worries about Ohio State recruiting for a very long time, and I think, frankly, and you would say that this was a genuine worry or a legitimate worry. This was something that fans should not have been or overreacting to. This was an actual thing that was a problem where the defensive recruiting was not on par. Where, you didn't have, hey, this quarterback's great, and we got these great receivers, but the defense ain't got it, right? We need more out of the defense. We need more out of the offensive line, and that's the problem. Okay, well, you have Na'eem Offord, who's now the number 1 player in the class, in your particular class. Then you have Devin Sanchez, who's another top 10 player. He's going to play corner. You have a top 50 player, top 40 player, technically, in Zahir Mathis, a defensive end. So your top 3 players in your 2025 class are defensive players. Then you have a quarterback, Tavian St. Clair, number 56 overall. Then you have Blake Woodby, who's corner, I mentioned, number 76 overall. So of your top 5 recruits, 4 of them are defensive players. Let me repeat that. 4 of them at Ohio State are defensive players. 3 of them play corner. 1 of them plays defensive end. And he's a 6'6", 225 defensive end that can rush the passer. That is exactly the type of class that Ohio State has kind of been wanting. Oh, yeah, by the way, then you have a top 80 offensive lineman in Carter Lowe who just committed. And he's, I think that guy's a really good football player. I think you watch him play and you look at what he can do and how he can move, and you have to be really excited about it. Then you have Javen Boggs, who we talked about this for a while. He's kind of moving up the rankings a little bit. Ohio State sees Jackson Smith and Jigbo when they see Javen Boggs. And then you have linebacker Eli Lee. And what do they think when they see Eli Lee? Tommy Eichenberg. And he's a 3-star recruit right now, number 484 in the class. But you go down the line and you're like, oh my goodness, this is what I have kind of been wanting. Like, if you're an Ohio State fan watching this, it's hard to be upset with this class right now, and it's hard to have any qualms with what's going on because, hey, they got that kind of high-level offensive lineman. They got the quarterback again. Obviously, the 2024 class was loaded with 2 quarterbacks. That's rare, but they got 2 of them. Then you have another quarterback. Then you just have this elite elite secondary building with your cornerback room, and an already very, very, very good, if not elite, secondary as it stands right now in Columbus. Then you have a defensive end. Then you just go down the line, and you're like, there's not, at this point of the game, as we record this, it is early February. At this point of the game, it's hard to poke a hole in this recruiting class. Do you want a linebacker? Yeah. Do you want more offensive linemen, more talented offensive linemen? Yeah. Do you probably need some other? Of course you need other positions. There's only 8 players in this class. But for where this class is with 8 players in early February, it's ridiculous. And Ohio State is kind of making a claim for that number 1 spot. If you look at average player rating, they're technically number 2, but no, they're really not in the 2025 average player rating. They're behind USC. USC has 1 player in that class who just reclassified to be a 2025 player, and he's a 5-star, but they only have 1 commit in the 25 class. So that really kind of raises your average. You know, they sign a 3 or 4-star player, that's going to bring them down. So Ohio State, for all intents and purposes, has the best recruiting class in the country right now in terms of average player ranking. Should they be behind Notre Dame because, you know, Notre Dame has more commits than they do, or at Clemson because Clemson has more commits than they do, or LSU because they have, you know, 1 more commit? We'll see. Like, we'll just give it a couple